Okay, so we're going to get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our virtual field day exploring cover crops strategies in a vineyard. My name is Finley. I'm a program coordinator with Farm Folk City Folk. It's great to see so many people on this call, some familiar faces, some new ones. Thanks for joining us. I'd like to acknowledge that I am joining from Saltamek, the traditional and unceded land of the Stalo Nation, specifically the Mathgui and Samath First Nations. Before we jump into our program, I'm just going to launch a quick poll for everyone to take. It's just 3 questions. We appreciate the feedback, and it's helpful to just get a sense of who's joining us and where you're coming from. So I'm going to launch that. It should pop up on your screen and just give you the option to answer the multiple choice questions. So I'll just give you a moment to do that. Looks like we've had most folks respond to the poll. So that's great. I don't think anybody else can see the results, but it looks like we have 74% of the folks here are coming as a farmer. 48% of you are joining from the Okanagan, some on Vancouver Island, some on the South Coast, and using a variety of beneficial management practices. Okay, so it looks like almost everyone's answered that. So I'm going to end this poll and then we can get started. Thank you for responding to that. That's really helpful. So we're going to start with a virtual field day and tour of Kalala Organic Estate Vineyard and Winery. This was filmed back in September at Kalala, located in the Thompson Okanagan region on the traditional and unceded territory of 3 interior nations, the Syilx, Secwepemc, and Inclopalmic peoples. If you aren't already familiar with Farm Folk City Folk, we are BC's oldest and largest food and agriculture charitable nonprofit organization. We're established in 1993, so we just turned 30 last year. Our programs seek to connect, empower, and inspire people to strengthen resilient, sustainable, and equitable food systems in BC. Our cover cropping events, of which this is one of them, are part of our Climate Solutions program, which is our response to the massive potential that agricultural lands have to mitigate climate change through a variety of practices. Our programming aims to engage with various levels of government to implement climate-friendly policies, work with farmers across BC to identify effective climate change mitigation strategies, and empower British Columbians to make climate-friendly food choices. I also want to acknowledge that this event is supported by the BC Climate Agri-Solutions Fund. Funding for the BC Climate Agri-Solutions Fund has been provided by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada through the Agricultural Climate Solutions On-Farm Climate Action Fund. So we have Julia Zato, our engagement manager at Farm Folk City Folk, with us on the call. She'll be active in the chat and helping out where needed. We are experiencing some inclement weather this evening, so hopefully there won't be any disruptions, but we'll do our best to keep things rolling. And we're joined by Karnail Singh Sidhu and Dr. Mehdi Sharifi. Karnail is a 3rd-generation organic farmer. He brings 20 years of knowledge and experience in organic agriculture. He officially opened the doors of Kalala Organic Estate Winery in 2008, which you'll learn a little bit more about in the video. Dr. Mehdi Sharifi has been working as a soil nutrient management research scientist at Summerland Research and Development Centre, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada since 2016. His research activities are focused on enhancing the environmental sustainability and resilience of perennial horticultural crops through ground vegetation management and the use of organic soil amendments and health promoting natural products. Mehdi and Sharifi, is there anything that you, Mehdi and Karnail, is there anything you want to add before we get started and play the video?
I'm good. Thank you so much for the introduction.
Awesome.
No, it's
okay.
all good to go.
Great. So the video is just over 18 minutes long. We'll watch it all in one go. I encourage you to write down any questions as they come up while you're watching. We're going to have a good amount of time for questions and answers following the video, so jot them down and we'll have time afterwards. Just a reminder to keep yourself muted while the video is playing, just so everyone can hear the audio clearly. I won't be showing my screen, but rather turning my camera into the video. So it's important for you to see the video full screen to on the top right corner, you should see a little box that says view, and if you select speaker view, then it should show up full screen. But feel free to let us know in the chat if you have any trouble with that. And I think that's all you need to know before we get started. So I'm just going to switch my camera and get the video playing.
My name is Karnail Singh Sidhu, and I run Kalala Organic Estate Winery and Organic Vineyards in West Kelowna. I'm in the wine industry since 1995, and I started my own winery back in 2006 and opened to public in 2008. Kalala runs about 70-acre land, which is including some orchard. And majority is vineyard. We have vineyard planted in Oliver, Peachland, West Bank, and Coldstream. So I think if I put all together, it's around 70 to 80 acres. We don't do any conventional farming. We only do organic. Anything we took over, we turned into organic. That's all it is.
So my name is Mehdi Sharifi. I'm a research scientist with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, Summerland Research and Development Center. My role there, I'm a nutrient management research scientist. So I do a lot of studies on different aspects of the nutrient management in the farm and focusing on improving the field management and the sustainable management of the different cropping system. My focus is mainly on the wine grapes as well as on cherries. Cover crops, they have multiple benefits. So you look at the literature, you see many benefits associated with the cover cropping in the vineyards. Some of the main benefits, one would be reducing the erosion. So when you're covering the surface of the soil, especially if your vineyards is on the of your soil over time. Second is the reducing the greenhouse gas emission and sequestering carbon. Mainly sequestering carbon in the soil because you improve the input of the carbon to your soil. So you have more input as the residues of the cover crops, and that some of that carbon sequestrate in the soil and stay in the soil, and then we start getting the benefit of higher soil organic matter, especially in the drier environment and the light texture soils. We see much more benefit from the higher organic matter content in the soil. Basically, organic matter in the soil is food for the organisms. So when you have more input of carbon to the soil, more carbon in the soil stored, you have higher biological activity in your soil, which have, again, multiple benefits. They have interactions with the roots. They suppress the root diseases, as well as they cycle the nutrients in the soil, nitrogen and carbon particularly, and the plants get more benefit from that cycling of the nutrients. Some of the cover crop, they have ability to fix nitrogen. So nitrogen from the air, they fix it, especially legumes, and that nitrogen will supply to the plants. And that way you can reduce the supply of nitrogen as a fertilizer. There are other benefits such as improving the biodiversity of the plants and attracting the beneficial insects. Beneficial insects is going to kind of control the pests, as well as you see some interaction with the diseases. Some of the cover crops reduce some of the diseases. Mentioned that when they planted lentil under the vine in covert, after multiple years the powdery mildew is reduced and they don't have to spray for powdery mildew, which is amazing. It's huge. We still don't know the mechanism, but definitely that interaction of the cover crops with the ecosystem in the vineyards, it's caused that less occurrence of that particular disease.
Cover cropping, initially my idea of cover cropping was whatever we grow, that we use it as a cover crop. And since I started knowing the Mehdi, then he did some experimental stuff. So that made me more interested in cover crops, because in an alleyway in vineyard there are lots of wasted space. So I want to grow something which we can use as a cash crop, not a cover crop, a cash crop too. So we decided to do some chickpeas last year. It turned out good, but I think of chickpeas also they add a nutrition value to the land, and mostly if we harvest them green, then all the nutrition left in the ground. Because if you let them to dry, then I think they also consume that back. In both situations, it's a win-win situation for us, because we harvest that crop, we can sell it. I think lots of people like green chickpeas. So that's where I'm working on. So I'm more looking into cover crop as a cash crop too. So we can get both benefit on the bottom line and in the soil. Back home, we do that kind of stuff, right? Like we seed some peas or mostly green moons that we seed before planting rice. And then you harvest it and then cultivate it under and plant rice on top of it, then it can get the nutrient. We're very initial stage to figure out is it going to work or not, or it going to make any difference economically. Challenge, first thing, we don't have proper seeding machine. We did hand seeding, and by hand seeding we don't have in a row, that's hard to do weed control. So that was the challenge. And harvesting is challenge, we have to hand harvest, because that costs money. It's lots of labor cost, which eventually we want to do like more mechanize it. So seed it, then we control, probably we control the weeds with the mechanical means, and we have a mechanical harvester. First of all, you have to prepare the land, which we did. We cultivate, then we rotottle, cultivate a couple times. Then once the land is ready, one thing you have to have is overhead irrigation. So we irrigate a few times, then cultivate, and then we plant it. So we plant, as I said, we plant by hand, but we made the lines with the cultivator, then we put the seed in those lines and covered. And then we seed in June, and we harvest on 17th of July. I think it was for 47 days. No, we didn't pull the plant out. We just cut the top of the plant. If we pull the plant out, then there's no benefit, because we pull the root out, which is the beneficial. So we cut the plant on the top. Once we take the pods out, we put that back into the field too, the leftover plant. One thing I learned, we can do twice a year, because there are 47 days. And then 47 days, that's 90 days. We have a longer growing season than 90 days. So that's another thing to, next year we're looking into, probably we plant earlier, then we plant later. And the other thing is, if I want to sell them in like a whole plant and in bushes, then I can probably scatter seeding week by week by week. Then you can you don't get everything harvest same time, so you have something ready, you cut that and send that to market, then cut the next one. So scatter the harvest like that, planting in a different date. That's another thing in future we will be looking to do.
We set up a greenhouse experiment in 2018. We tested 23 different plant species in the greenhouse, and then we planted grapes in the greenhouse in a pot experiment. We planted wine grapes into the cover crops. We tested that. We get some experience with those species. We selected some of them that they establish well, they're competitive, they grow faster. In 2009, field screening of the cover crops in 2 vineyards, as well as at the Summerland Research and Development Center. So we had multiple species tested in the alleyway, as well as different species tested under wine. Based on that, we developed a model. That model helped to select the best cover crops for each farm, as well as we come up with a list of criteria that can be used for selection of the cover crops, which before that nobody kind of have that kind of criteria. And cover cropping in the grapes is very different than cover cropping in the field crops or even in the orchards. In 2020, based on the experience that we had in the greenhouse as well as in the field testing, then we set up an experiment at Kalala and Covert farms. And we had 3 mixture of cover crops in the alleyway, the ones that they work well in the greenhouse as well as in the field, and 3 undervine mixture. And we used that one multiple years in order to get the impact of cover cropping both on the soil as well and yield and fruit quality. So we've been doing that since 2020. This past year was the last year of the experiment. It was a 5 years experiment. We put a new proposal to continue that work to answer some of the questions that raised during this first experiment. For example, looking at the irrigation, the interaction of the irrigation and cover cropping, as well as looking at some of the drought tolerant species, because this is a dry environment, semi-arid region. In the summertime, if you don't have irrigation system, the cover crop, they won't survive in the alleyways. So basically you need to, if you want to have a cover crop in this region, you need to have a dual irrigation system. Most of the vineyards, they have drip irrigation for the vines, but if you want to have a cover crop in the alleyways, you need to have this overhead or understory sprinklers as a second irrigation for the cover crops. The effect of cover crops on the climate change and carbon sequestration, their direct effect and indirect effects. The direct effect is that how much CO2 and nitrous oxide emitted by having cover crop in the ground. Is it reduce the amount of emission compared to the time that you don't have the cover crops, or it's increase it? When you look at the literature, you see that there is like contrasting like reports. Some reports they show is increased, some they show it decreased, mainly because of the conditions. So the environmental condition can change the results, as well as the type of the cover crops and the management of the cover crop. So in general, there are not a lot of studies on the emission of the greenhouse gas emission from the cover cropping system and comparing that with the conventional system. So there more research need to be done. But the indirect effects are much more clear. For example, when you have cover crops and your cover crops can fix nitrogen, then you use less nitrogen fertilizers. As a result, you have less emissions. And emission, it comes from the availability of the nitrogen fertilizers because they're readily available, versus the nitrogen coming from the cover crop, it takes time to release, it's gradually released, as well as in the process of making the fertilizers. It's very energy intensive process. So with that, when you're using cover crops, instead of applying fertilizer, then you're reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. The second effect is on the carbon sequestration. Cover crops, they have an input of the carbon to the soil, and that carbon in the soil can sequestrate, stay in the soil. So this is another positive effect on the climate change and greenhouse gas emission. So the cover crop study that we did, we did it in 3 phases in the first experiment. Phase 1 was a greenhouse selection. Phase 2 was just to go to the field and do a field screening of the cover crop. And phase 3 was that the cover crop species that we noticed that they're doing better in the field, we choose those ones, we use some mixtures. We did it the field experiment, and then we start measuring the impact on the soil, on the vine itself, and on the fruits. So we did all kind of measurement in the soil, looking at the carbon sequestration, looking at the nitrate and ammonium as source of nitrogen in the soil. We look at the microorganisms, soil microbiome, to see if there is any differences when we have cover crop versus we don't. And we also look at the vine nutrient status, especially nitrogen, when we have legumes, to see if these legumes contribute to the nitrogen nutrition of the vine itself. We look at the quality of the berries as well as the yield. And we compare all of those to see between these different treatments, which treatment does better, which of these treatments establish better, fix nitrogen, contribute to the soil carbon, and have a better kind of balance of the nitrogen in the soil. We're still working on the result that we got. I have a master's student, Jamie Yearly, that she's working on the data and now in the process of writing her thesis. So some of the result is just coming as we speak. But we noticed that different cover crops, they have different impact on the soil nitrogen. So some of the cover crops that more dominant in the legumes, they supply more nitrogen to the soil. We look at the carbon, we notice some cover crops supply more carbon to the soil versus the other one. We also noticed that some of the cover crops, because one of the benefits of cover cropping is suppressing the weeds. If you don't have a cover crop and you don't cultivate or spray, then you're going to have a huge growth of the weeds that they're going to compete with the vines. So that's why they always try to cultivate or try to spray with the herbicides. So a replacement for the herbicides. Now we see in some of the countries like France, they already banned the herbicides or particularly the glyphosate under wine. Same thing may happen in the near future here. We were looking for an alternative, and an alternative is that to grow a cover crop under wine. That cover crop can provide some benefit. One of those benefits is suppressing the weeds. So we noticed that some of the cover crops, they have these allopathic effect. For example, when we planted the fall rye plus wedge, these two together, they grow really good. They provide carbon and biomass, as well as this suppressing the weeds. So the amount of weeds that we found in this mixture was much less than the other mixture that we have. So it depends on the goal of the grower. Some growers, they focusing on the supplying nitrogen. Some, they like to reduce the erosion. Some, their main goal is that to suppress the weeds. Depends on that, the selection of the cover crop will be different. So one of the main aspects of cover crops is that the goal that the grower has. So they need to define their goal first, or the priority of the goal. Sometimes they have 2 or 3 goals, but the most important for them is nitrogen. Then we have to have at least one legume or one of the species that has the ability to supply nitrogen, either through fixing nitrogen or through having a deep-rooted crop that can suck the nitrogen from the deeper soil layers and bring it to the surface. Another factor that me and Karnail, we always talk, is the compaction in the alleyways, because there is a lot of traffic for the field work in the vineyards as well as in the orchards. We see the soil is very compact. So some of these cover crops, they have ability to loosen the soil just by having a tap root. For example, we use the tillage radish, and tillage radish has ability to break this hard pan or this soil, compacted soil, and allow a better flow of the air as well as a better flow of the water in the soil. Some of the major benefit, one is reducing the nitrogen fertilizer by having the cover crops, reducing the erosion, reducing the compaction, adding soil organic matter to the soil. Particularly in this region, most of the soil are lighter texture soil, sandier. They don't have much organic matter in them. And multiple year of the cultivation cause to reduce the organic matter in the soil. So having cover crops will bring back that carbon, and with that carbon being in the soil, the biological activity will be stimulated, and we're going to have a more alive soil that has all these processes that help the vine to get the nutrients that it needs and to get the water and other resources that needs through these processes. So especially for the organic farms, I think cover crop is a great tool, but it's not only for organic. So the conventional growers can benefit from the same thing. And we have now BC Living Lab project, and that project basically focusing on the greenhouse gas emission and carbon sequestration from the cover cropping practice. And it allows flexibility to the growers that participating, that use the cover crops that they would like to try, or they have some experience and get more information on those cover crops, particularly in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for watching. For those of you who joined partway through the video, we do have a link to watch it on YouTube as well, so you'll be able to go back and see the full thing if you'd like to. Before we get into the Q&A, we're just going to hear a quick update from Mehdi and Karnail about what's been happening since September and some more details. So I'll pass it over to you, Mehdi.
Thank you very much.
is my sound, you have my sound good quality because I'm using the headphones. Right, I'm going to share the screen.
Nothing's showing up on our end. Karnail, were you also going to do a quick update? So if you wanted to give an update since we did our filming back in September, and then I'll try to figure out this presentation with Mehdi.
Yeah, what we're doing, we're looking into expanding that project to different species. And in the coming year, I'm going to plant probably 4 different cover crop and cash crop, I call it. We are probably going to plant lentils and chickpeas and some beans and peas itself, because my focus is whatever I can harvest to make some money. That's what I'm working on it, because cost of doing farming is getting expensive and expensive. So we have to increase the production per acre. Grapes we can get so far much. Now that bare land, I want to use to produce something else. That's what we're working in the coming season.
Awesome, thanks for that update. Maybe as we wait to see if we can get the slideshow up, we'll just move into, if anybody has questions specifically for Karnail, feel free to raise your hand or type them in the chat, and we can just give a couple minutes to see if we can sort out the slideshow. Looks like Kirsten's hand is raised, so feel free to ask a question.
Hi, Karnail and Mehdi.
Hey,
really
how are you?
interesting presentation. Great to see you. I was really curious if it's great to hear you're planning to plant chickpeas and lentils next year. And I was curious if you are planning to make any adjustments to how you establish the crops in terms of site preparation and seeding.
Yes, I think I'm going to have a seeder this time, so we can seed properly. Because last time, as you know, that we did everything by hand, which is more time consuming and a little more costly. So we are looking into hire a company who have a seeder, and we can have them to do seeding for us. And then also looking to, I'm searching right now, there are some smaller harvesters available from China that they go in they're like 3 to 4 feet wide. So I'm researching on them. We may get one of those to do the harvest work, because that's another thing. When we harvest them by hand, that cost lots too. And nobody wants to do that, because you have to sit on your and cut that thing. It's a hard work. So that's what we are looking into it. Are we going to buy this year that stuff? I don't know yet. But seeder, we're going to hire someone to do seeding properly. So one thing, then we can seed the rate we want to do it, because by hand it's hard to calculate the rate and how much we're going to throw in. And then it to give us a better idea in end of the season, the cost wise, and does it make sense in future? Which is like we are in a very initial stage. I think maybe it will take me 2 to 4 years before I can say, okay, that may work or that's not work. But,
Thanks a lot. That's going to be interesting to see what you find.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I look searching right now for that little harvester.
It looks like we had a question pop up in the chat from JS, and they were wondering, do you plant an undervine crop as well as the cash crop between?
At this moment, I only did an early veg, not undervine. And we may expand that in the future, but right now I'm working on alleyways to do. And it's like it's a lot of work, right? You need lots of help to do. Once we figured out alleyways, then I can go to the next step, maybe undervine, planting something undervine that be helpful for in the future.
Okay, thank you. Julia and Mehdi, are we having any luck with the slideshow?
I'll try to share one more time and then see. And if not, then I just talk about it and you can imagine the pictures.
That sounds great.
Thank you. Do you see anything? Maybe I should exit.
I think that's a good idea. I think
I
sometimes
should
if
exit
you,
and come back because the error is from Zoom.
okay,
So maybe I exit.
good idea.
I join again. I restart my computer. You continue the questions and discussions, and I'll be back. Thank you.
Okay,
Sorry.
thank you.
Okay, well, are there any other questions in the meantime? We also have some questions that you all submitted beforehand. So if there aren't questions from people right now, then we can bring those up and talk about those. Okay, so one of the questions that we had come in beforehand was about cover crops that would reduce the need for mowing and not harm grape production. Do you have any recommendations, Karnail?
What's the question?
It's which cover crops would reduce the need for mowing and also not harm grape production?
That's, I don't think any cover crop will hurt the grape production. As my experience as an organic grower, we always have something growing in the vineyard, and it looked like a jungle in the growing season, and we never feel like we don't get the production we want. But I think more it will be Mehdi who can elaborate more on it, because he's. But my experience, I don't think it's any cover crop will hurt the production. But I learned if we let more vegetation grow in alleyways, and that do reduce the load of powdery mildew. That few years back, I have a fellow from Santa Lucia, Master's in Agriculture, and he scouted through the vineyard. He found 5 different fungus species, which he told me that they all feed on powdery mildew. So we did a little bit non-official like experimental work. Then we did some clean cultivation in vineyard, and some we did as usual we have. And we did notice that wherever we have a clean cultivation, we have more pressure from powdery mildew than the one don't have a clean cultivation, have a large cover crop. So that's what we did a couple of years, and we noticed that it do make a difference on the powdery mildew if you leave the cover crop and compared to if you do clean cultivation.
Great, okay. I'm seeing a question. I think this just came as a direct message. And it may be that Mehdi is the better person to answer this, but they're just wondering if there's a list or table, and maybe you've done this with some of the cover crops that you've tried, of how they've done and what the benefits were compared to each other. Do you have something like that? And I'm sure Mehdi has a lot of data, so we can wait for him to join in.
We don't have any data yet because it's the first time we did it. And yeah, no, we are very initial stage where we can. I have no data right now because 1 year we did it. It's the kind of late to start with, but because we also sometimes face problem as an organic grower. Sometimes you don't get certified organic seeds, so then you have to hunt for them. So
Okay, great. There's a couple questions and I'm just trying to decide which ones to wait on and which ones to ask you, but there's one that looks definitely relevant for you, and that is what is the yield per acre from your vineyard? And they just asked if you had damage from the previous winter, bud damage from the previous winter.
yes, we have lots of damage previous winter, mostly to the crop, and in West Bank I didn't lost many wines. Even I didn't qualify to claim a dead wine claim, but we did lost crops. In a regular year, our average tonnage per acre between 3.5 4 ton. And one thing I want to clear here, because my planting is 4 by 10, so that also affects the yield too. If I plant a 4 by 8, that increase 20% production. But we harvest between 3.5 to 4 ton an acre.
Okay, great, thank you. Oh, here's one just come in. Well, there's a couple questions about animals. Have you experimented with any animals, either using cover crops to feed small animals, or like rabbits, turkeys, chickens, or sheep?
No, we don't use any animals right now, because one thing, I don't like fencing the properties. So if you have animals, you have to fence it. I like to see some wildlife in my vineyard. So if that's the one reason, I had one vineyard where we can fence around and try the sheep, and I may try there, but I didn't do any in the past because none of my vineyard is fenced. So
that makes sense. I'll just give a few more. Mehdi, do you want to try showing your screen again, and then we can come back to the questions? So that looks like that's showing up for us. It's not in presentation mode, but we were mentioning while you were not in the call that we can see the slides this way. So if you wanted to present, we can see them. It's just not quite full screen, which is, I think, okay.
Oh, we just have to unmute him. I think he might need to be a co-host, Finn. I'm not able to make that change on my end. Are you able to update his permissions? Perfect. Thank you. Okay.
And it's showing up full screen.
You see
Excellent.
my slide? You see that? Okay.
Yeah, it's showing up perfectly now.
Excellent. Yes, my apology. I do that like 100 times per week, and it always work. And when we really need it to work, it doesn't work. But anyway, so I didn't. I wasn't intending to have a presentation. I just wanted to show you some pictures. The videos that you saw, they're beautiful, really nice videos. But I just wanted to show how the vineyard looked like in October. So we went in October to the vineyard and we took some pictures. And I just wanted to show you at the end of the season how it looked like. So you can see here, this is, so I'm going to show the alley treatment, and then I'm going to show you the under vine or row treatment. This is the treatment of having, perennial ryegrass, tillage radish, and Dutch white clover. And so this is the second year of this treatment. So we had the first year, the tillage radish grow in the first year, a very good establishment. They kind of like break down the compaction a little bit. And then that they also competed with the weed, created an environment that the white clover can establish well. So both white clover and the perennial ryegrass, they established better in the second year. this is a picture. Again, this is end of the season, so things are not as fresh as you saw in the videos. In the videos were, I think, in August or June, July or August, I can't remember, but it was earlier in the season, so everything was like greener and fresher. This is the second treatments that we had in the alley, which is a mixture of different fescues, plus the Dutch white clover. And the establishing of the grasses is a little bit difficult. They're not very competitive. They grow slower. So we see a lot of weeds, especially in the second year here. And in this particular site, we saw more of a mixture of everything. And this one is fall rye and hairy wedge. So fall rye hairy wedge is an annual. You need to replant it every year, or you need to let it go to the seed so it can reseed itself, and then next year they come back. So here at the end of the second year, we don't see any of that. So at the start of the season, we saw that the fall rye came back although it is annual, but it came back the second year, and when we mow it come back, but gradually towards the end of the second year, they just disappear, both hairy wedge and fall rye. So this is what we recommend, that you plant them every year. Again, something about this site. So we have 2 sites in the experiment, and we did it like a 4-year of experiment there. Down south in Oliver, in the vineyard that we have there, the perennial cover crops, they really overwinter well, and they come back the next year really good. In this site, which is a little bit colder, more towards the north in West Kelowna, it's hit and miss. So some years the plants, they overwinter well, even the Dutch white clover that's supposedly is winter hardy, but some years it doesn't make it, some years it make it. So so maybe the recommendation is that as you go northern into the colder climate, maybe annual cover crops, or using that reseeding basically protocol, it works better than having the annual and then kind of not knowing how many percentage of the cover crop is going to overwinter. So that's something that we observed over the year. But I'll show you a graph that how well, when we were establishing fall rye and hairy wedge, how well they're competing with the weeds. So extremely efficient in the year that you establish them. You barely see any weeds growing, and they grow really fast. They produce biomass, but the allelopathic effect that they have, it's very effective in suppressing the weeds. So this is again one of the alley treatment that we had. So we had 3 alley treatment. One was a mixture of annuals, which is this one, and then the other 2 was mixture of the perennial. And this is the control, which what we did in the control, we just let whatever it was there to grow, and we just mowed it. So everything else that we did for all the treatments, all the other 3, the same thing we did for the control in the alleyway, but we just mow it, and we had the same irrigation and so on, and then we compare those. So for that reason, you don't see huge differences between treatments. So if we had a treatment that there was nothing growing in the alleyways or nothing growing under the vine, you would have seen much more differences between the cover crop and no cover. But now we have the weeds, and we want to show the benefits of the cover crops over just allowing the weeds to grow, or anything that already or native species that are growing there, let them to grow. This is the under vine. So we had Ladino white clover. Again, due to cold in the last winter, we lost some of the Ladino white clover. So you see at the end of the season, there's less of that. Early in the season, we had good establishment of the Ladino white clover. We had the annual rye and bird's foot trefoil. You see beautiful bird's foot trefoil establishment here under the vine. So And in the videos, if you notice, there was those yellow flowers, and those are the bird's foot trefoil. It is a legume. It is very drought tolerant, more native to this region. And this is a variety or cultivar called Bruce, which is breeded in back in the east in Nova Scotia, but by one of the colleagues, Yusuf Papadopoulos, which is a forage researcher, and we got the seeds from him. So it is a little bit more faster growing and more competitive compared to the other cultivars of bird's foot trefoil. But it worked really good under wine, and you see there's barely any weeds growing in that area. And this is the lentils. So lentils, they work very good in the vineyards under wine. They don't get too tall. They compete with the weeds. They produce biomass, but the life cycle ended up in the middle of the summer. So end of July, you just have a dry mat. And if you let it go, it goes to the seed and seeds drop. And then after a few years, when you have enough seed bank, then it's just reseed itself and it grows. So you don't need to cultivate and seed it. So that was one of the interesting cover crops. And the vineyards that we work with in the south, they have also animals and they have chickens, and chickens, they're feeding on the lentils, and they're really happy with those. This is the control. So control, just the weeds growing. Some are tall, some are short. We had to mow it a couple of times, and a mixture of everything. And it seems it's more competing with the cover crop that we chose for the underwine. It was purposely we wanted to be less competitive. But when you let the weeds grow, you see the signs of competition. In the bottom picture, you see when at the start in the right side, it is the control plots, but it's ended into a bird's foot trefoil plot, and you see the differences. You see the bird's foot is pretty green. It's look really nice versus the control that it looks like drier. Just show you a couple of pictures. This is from the other vineyards. I didn't have time to put together the graph for this vineyard, but this is one season that we look at the carbon content, or carbon is indicator of the organic matter. So we wanted to show how much carbon by cover cropping entered the soil. So what you see in yellow is the weeds, amount of carbon that entered the soil through weeds, and what you see in the green is the cover crop. So look at the right side is the control. So we had, yes, weeds also contribute to the carbon. Of course, they're plants, they have carbon in their structure, so they provide some contribution. But then compare it with the left side that we have fescue and clover, and we have ryegrass, radish, and clover, and you see it's almost double amount of carbon entered the soil. So this is just the biomass that they eventually left on the ground, or if it was the year that we did the cultivation and replanted, they mixed with the surface soil. And rye and vetch, although it didn't produce a lot of carbon, but you see the amount of weeds is significantly less than any other treatments, which is, I explained, is the allelopathic effect. This one is nitrogen, so we're always interested in nitrogen, we're interested in supplying nitrogen. You see again the differences. So if you let the weeds to grow and you just manage that, you have that graph in the right side. And if you have the cover crops, then you you can double the amount of nitrogen that entering the soil, and as a result, you can reduce in the if you're not organic, you can reduce the amount of nitrogen fertilizer that you're adding. And one interesting thing, so I don't want to make it really long, and I want to give more time for the questions and interactions. but we monitor the moisture in all these treatments over 3 years. So we started 2021, and the last data is the last October 2023. And we had 3 sensors for each treatment. The blue lines that you see, they are the soil moisture. The red lines are the soil temperature. And we want to see what is the effect of cover crop on these ones. And you see a lot of up and down. The shadow that you see is the variation of the parameters in that treatment. But I just wanted to compare one of those. This is the row or undervine, and you look at the left, the green circle. It is in the bear's foot trefoil that you saw. We had a very good establishment this past year, and compare those with the control in the right. So one thing that you can see, and it's very easy to see, is less variation. You see these up and downs are less when we had these cover crop compared to the control, which control, it wasn't, again, bare soil. If you had the bare soil, the difference was much more. So you see, it seems that the cover crop has a moderating effect. So it's kind of both for the temperature and moisture, it kind of balance it a little bit and buffer it, so it doesn't change as much compared to the time that you don't have that much cover. And same thing for the alleyways. You see, we compared in the left, the green is the 2022. We had very good establishment of the perennial ryegrass, tillage radish, and white clover, and compare that with the right side, that red circle in the middle, and that is basically the control. And you see the variation, that shadow is much less, and you see there is less variation in the moisture. So I just wanted to show you that, and so you see the moisture and temperature also impacted. And in the new experiment that we're going to start it from this coming year, from April, we're going to look at the moisture and temperature in the canopy as well, and see if cover crops has any impact on the temperature of the berries, as well as the moisture and the temperature or relative humidity and temperature in the canopy. And yeah, this is some pictures. So every year we have these field tours in the vineyards that we do cover cropping, and it's really interactive and really nice. And we try to continue doing that in the next growing season for the next few years. I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks for that update. It's great to see more about what you're up to and some of the information. It's amazing how much research and experimentation you've done. I just have been trying to keep track. There's been some questions coming in through the chat. So I'm just going to go back to some of the questions that were asked a few minutes ago, and then we can move forward to more present ones. So if you've been asking questions, don't worry, they haven't been getting lost. Someone wanted to know, I'm curious about the changes you've needed to make in irrigation practices. Did you have to do much additional overhead irrigation to maintain the cover crop, especially given the hot year last year?
Yeah, very good question. Always irrigation is a major question in cover cropping, how to deal with the irrigation, how often irrigate it, and so on. So what we did in this experiment, and that was kind of like we just getting used to see what works and what doesn't work. We used the under canopy sprinklers, and we irrigated more often at the start of the season when we just seeded, because we wanted the seeds to germinate and establish well, and then we reduced the irrigation as we went through the growing season. Summertime, it was really dry, so we have to irrigate at least once per week. So we try not to over irrigate, but in some years, and Karnail saw that, we saw that when we irrigated for the cover cropping, we got more powdery mildew. If we don't control it earlier on, then powdery mildew was an issue. So this year, we started the growers started controlling earlier on. We reduced the irrigation, and we didn't have any issue with the powdery mildew in any of the vineyards. But the other years, last year, we had an issue. We had quite a bit of powdery mildew. Everywhere was a lot of powdery mildew, but particularly when we compare the section that we irrigated compared to section that we didn't irrigate it, we saw the differences, and there was more in the irrigation. We had a long discussion with Karnail, and we think under canopy sprinklers is not the way to irrigate the cover crops. It doesn't work well because it creates a lot of moisture in that area. So we think the overhead might be better, and it's kind of overhead irrigation also. If you have the susceptibility to the powdery mildew, it will wash the spores from the leaves to the ground. So it's actually can reduce the powdery mildew. But so we're going to kind of switch more to a different type of irrigation in the new experiment. And what I'm going to try, what we're testing in this new experiment is using the drought tolerant cover crops. So the ones that they don't need much irrigation, and their water need is matched with the wine's water requirement. And we're going to switch to a different type of irrigation. So this is a big question, and we're still working on that to figure things out.
Thanks for that detailed answer. I just want to jump back because we talked about this while you were out of the call, and I think you might have a different answer than Karnail had. Someone was just, a couple of people actually were wondering about experimenting with animals, and if you have experience with that. They mentioned sheep, or also they know of someone in South Africa who's using blocks of ducks in the vineyard. So do you have experience with animals and how you've done that?
I don't, but I've seen. So in the Covert family farm down in Oliver that we do a study, they have chickens, as well as at the end of the season, they have the cows that they grazing on the whatever that is left, either cover crops or the leaves and stuff. And so they manage that, they rotate it. At times, we saw that our irrigation infrastructure is broken because the cows try to rub themselves against them. So we saw that, but it seems to be working, and they think that they get benefit from the byproducts of the animals and so on. So, and also they take care of the extra seed, they take care of some of the insects and so on. So if someone has possibility to do that, I'm sure that integration of the animal and viticulture would be great, but it require infrastructure and require like kind of preparation. Is not something for everyone. Particularly for the larger vineyard, it might be more difficult to manage that kind of get that kind of things, but I think it could be a positive. I haven't researched it, and I don't have a personal experience with that. This is what I saw.
Great, thank you. Before I ask the next question, I just wanted to make sure that it's clear that please feel free to raise your hand and ask questions yourselves. I'll keep going through the questions in the chat because we're getting great questions there, but if you'd like to voice your question, please feel free to do so. Someone else was wondering, does your row spacing have an impact on what cover crop you use or dictate what you can use?
Yeah, go ahead, Karnail, go ahead.
I don't think it is, as long as your equipment can fit to do it. Because most important thing to do cover crop, what do you want to do, what kind of equipment you have, right? And you can do almost any cover crop, any row spacing, as long as you have means to manage it.
Yeah, I agree with Karnail. So the only limitation is the size of the equipment. So if you do it mechanically, then your equipment need to fit between the rows, and there are ways to do also underwine if you have the right equipment. So of course, if you have a larger vineyard, then mechanizing that is going to simplify things for you. Something that I like is to use the drill seeder. So that reduces the amount of cultivation, and we know the more cultivating, it means the more burning the organic matter, and this is what we don't want. So using that kind of drill irrigation or no seeding or no-till seeding, that would be ideal, especially if you have a very sandy soil. So because sandy soils, they're more irrigation and they're more chance for losing the organic matter. So in one of the vineyards, we used that drill seeding, and it was pretty successful and is established pretty well.
So we had a question from Marvin, and this was in reference, Mehdi, to when you were going through your slides and had photos. They were wondering what you use as a mower, and they just said that they have a tree nursery and use a flail mower that captures the clippings and delivers them to the tree or vine row.
What's the question?
It was just around what you're using as a mower.
Oh, we use both flail mower and it's called the finishing mower. The finishing mower is my first choice because what we do that have wheel on it, I actually want to keep, when I mow, still want to keep some vegetation underneath. So I set up to 6 to 8 inch high. So it's mowing is not my preference. Only I do around the winery because I get complaint from vine shop staff. So that then we just set our mower about 6 to 8 inch, then it look more uniform. So to still have that crop growing.
So we rely on support from the grower to mow it for us. So that's what the Karnail helping us to mow whenever is needed. But in general, first of all, we try, as Karnail said, not to mow from the ground. So we always leave like a few inches of the cover crop so it grow back there, and that way is also keep the moisture better, so it's not like bare soil for a while. And also we using the cover crop, so this is the difference of cover cropping in the vineyards versus cover cropping in the field crop. Necessarily high organic matter or fast grow and tall plants is not good for the vineyard because it make the management more difficult, and it need more frequent mowing. And each time that you mow, you have these traffic, you have compaction, you burn the diesel fuel, the time. Grower is very busy with multiple other things and managing the vineyards, and that would be an extra burden on the grower. So that, for that reason, we're using cover crops that the growth is moderate, is not like fast growing, or it doesn't get really tall and come into the fruiting zone. So this is, to me, the preference is that to have minimum maintenance for the cover crop. So no fertilizer for the cover crop. They should be self-sufficient. When it's possible, make it a mixture. So the grass and brassica, as well as the legumes, they grow together and they're supporting each other because they have different rooting system. And also there is nitrogen fixing going on. And so when possible, use the perennial, and also use the ones that competing with the weeds, so we get good establishment. Because if you plant something and it doesn't establish, then you basically have just the weeds or random plants growing there.
Awesome, you're both such a wealth of information. Someone was asking, how are the alleyways prepared for planting cover crops?
So we just cultivate it very shallow. So we use the cultivator, we cultivate the alleyways, but we try to do that every other year. So we plant it one year, we have that establishment year, and then we have the next year, which is good, especially the legumes they established, and now it is the maximum nitrogen fixation kind of capacity of them. It's going to be in the second year because the roots now established and the plant established. So we cultivate it, but again, as I said, we can have drill seeders that kind of reduce the need for that kind of cultivation. The seeds directly drill into the soil and then they grow.
There was just a question that came in asking if I believe it just came in. Is there increased problem with rodents with crops that have seeds they can feed on?
Karnail, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, it can, because then rodent can hide under very well, right? And that if it's not hiding space, then there are predators. They can attack them faster and kill them. But cover crop do help them to hide. So, but in my vineyard, I didn't see any increase as what I have. So, but I think it's the same amount of mounts I see in a vineyard with the cover crop every year. So,
for me, we had the kind of experimental plot, which was a small. It was not large scale, the whole vineyard. So it's very hard to kind of judge based on the small plots. But this is the question that I always get. And I'll see in the literature that the chance with some cover crops can increase. So especially if you have a mat, it could be a place. It is more concerned in the tree fruits than in the vineyards because they can damage the trunk of the tree. In the vineyards, there's a moderate kind of like concern. There might be cover crops that we can plant it to reduce for the smell and chemical that they have. They can reduce, basically deter the rodents.
Okay, great. Jesse just had asked, did tractor ruts affect the ability to use the seeder, and was the seeder on a 3-point hitch or towed behind?
Sorry, what was the first part of the question?
They were wondering if tractor ruts affected the ability to use the seed drill / seeder.
Tractor size, you said?
Tractor ruts.
Oh. So in Covert family farm, they had just a regular orchard or vineyard tractor. And the seeder is kind of, I think it's towed, but I'm not sure.
no, it's it is a 3-point hitch.
3-point hitch, yes, it's 3-point hitch.
It do have wheels on it.
Okay. If any of these questions, if you want further clarification on the answers, feel free to chime in on the chat or raise your hand. So we had a question from before that people submitted, and someone was wondering if there's suggestions for cover crops for a new vineyard with dry land.
So if you want to prepare the land to plant it to the cover crop, so you have a year, you're switching from orchard to vineyard, or you have a land that you want to plant the grapes, so you have that year kind of break, then you can use a cover crop that can supply more carbon to the soil, so that in that case you don't have the wine, you can have something and you can focus on something that produces the maximum biomass. What I like and usually recommend is to use the fall rye, because it's established really good, it grow really fast, it compete, knock down the weeds, and it mature relatively early, so you can either use you can either roll it, so you can use the roller crimper to roll it, and then you have a live mulch, or you can incorporate it, mow it, basically incorporate it, and you can mix it with some kind of like legume. So when it mature, you mow from the higher kind of like a few inch above the ground, and then the legume establish after the far right. But definitely there are other options, many other options. If you already planted and now you're thinking, okay, what should I do? You got to be a little bit more careful, because you don't want to compete with the new wines and kind of make them weak. So what do you do? You either kind of give it a little bit of time to establish, maybe a year or two, before you start full cover cropping, or you use cover crops that are not competitive, and particularly in the alley, not under vine. So I wouldn't suggest that you right away plant the vine and put something on the row, because that kind of increase the chance of competition. So it's really depends on what you're trying to achieve, but you can do the alleyways, and then gradually you can have plants that are a little bit more growing a little bit more aggressively.
I will suggest one other thing: add more good quality compost before you plant new vineyard. It helps.
Great point, Karnail.
Great, and I'll ask this as well. There might be overlap, I'm not sure, but someone was looking for ideas to rebuild soil. Do you have recommendations for that?
So a good question. Something that we notice is that, particularly if you are in the lighter soil textures, which we have a lot of vineyards on the sandy soil or loamy sand, and then when the carbon enters the soil, it can decompose really fast. So, and one of the factors that impact this decomposition is carbon to nitrogen ratio. So if you have a really low carbon to nitrogen ratio, just a few months after the carbon enters the soil, it can decompose and you can lose it, and you don't get much benefit from that. So in these kind of cases, you want to improve your soil, you want to improve the carbon, you want to do the carbon sequestration, and you're going to improve the soil health. So what you do is that you need to have a right recipe with the right CN ratio. So you need a little bit higher CN ratio, and that achieved by including the grasses as well as including the cereals into your mixture. So a mixture of all legumes, it may decompose very fast, and you may not get the benefit that you're expecting from that, except a quick release of nitrogen. But if you're trying to long-term to build your soil, then you need a crop that has fibrous roots, a lot of roots, root to shoot ratio is higher, and also it has higher carbon to nitrogen ratios, so the resident time of the carbon in the soil is longer, and then it starts accumulating over time, and you start seeing more and more of their benefits. So I'm currently writing a paper that kind of discuss all these details from the experiment, and we're hoping to submit that very soon. So it's going to come out hopefully this year, which we explain all these interaction of the carbon and cover crops and so on. And one other point, if I have time to mention quickly, again, it's getting really technical, but when you do the cover cropping in the vineyard, the first few years of cover cropping, the strategy could be different than the longer term. So in the shorter term, you want to have an organic matter enter to the soil that is more labile. So you have higher ratio of the legumes. And for that, because the reason that we want that to have more labile carbon is that to kind of cover the surface of the soil particles. Over time, when you saturated that pool of carbon in the soil, then you can switch to a little bit more recalcitrant forms of carbon, so you can kind of add more to the grasses or have more like cereal into the mixture, and they will help to contribute to the particulate organic matter, which is like a small size organic matter that's sitting in the soil. So that way you kind of contributing first to that very important pool of labile carbon that it's connected with your soil particles and is very resilient, and it can stay in the soil for a longer time. And then later on, you can focus on adding the particulate organic matter and improving that.
Amazing. I think we probably have time for one or two more questions, and I just saw one come through. Someone was wondering, have you done nutrient leaf analysis on the grape with the different cover crops? From the video with and the photos, the grape leaves look like they have nutrient deficiency, more or less. They mentioned magnesium and nitrogen are the most visible.
Yeah. Karnail, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, we do have a nitrogen deficiency in my soil here. Actually, nitrogen, when we did the soil analysis, it's negligible. So that it shows up late in season after August. You can see very visible nitrogen deficiency. But when we see on the growth, it's not, growth-wise, it's not bad. And also, where we're doing cover crop experimental work, that's a very marginal area of the vineyard. That's the worst area of the vineyard we have. So it's not really represent all the vineyard too, but we do have a deficiency of nitrogen.
So it is common in the organic vineyards to see some degree of nitrogen deficiency because they don't use fertilizers. So most of the forms of nitrogen they use is more like the organic forms of nitrogen and more biological form of nitrogen that they release over time. So it's not like quickly release a lot of nitrogen and then your plants become green and so on. But as Karnail says, the impact on the growth and yield is not huge. What we did, yes, we measure nitrogen in the leaf every season, and then we compared between the treatments. We did not see, some years, sometimes we see in the more legume type of cover cropping, we see a little bit of more, but is not huge. The differences is not huge. So even though if you have a legume, it takes time for the legume to start contributing to the wine and nitrogen requirements. So it takes longer time. So it's not, again, quick release of the nitrogen. Sometimes when you mow it, then you have a quicker release at that time for a short period of time, and then again it's becomes slow. But yeah, that was a good observation.
So we just have a couple minutes left, and there's one question. So I think I'll ask this, and then we'll close up the Q&A portion because we're getting close to 7. But someone was just wondering, what is your frequency of soil testing?
Oh, I did only 20 some year ago when I first planted the vineyard. But after that, I never did soil testing. So we may do next year because now we're working on different projects. But I think this should done every couple of years.
Yeah, so because we are researcher and we do research, we do it very often, relatively often. So at the start of the experiment, we usually, before we plant the cover crops, we do a full soil test. So we have all the parameters or soil properties. And then during the time that we growing the cover crop in this like 3, 4, 5 years, then every year we measure the nitrogen. So in the 0 to 15, 15 to 30, we measure nitrate and ammonium. At times we measure it at the start of the season, mid-season, end of the season, because we're interested to see the dynamic of the nitrogen. At the end of the experiment, again, we do a full characteristics to see what are the changes in the carbon, for example, or what are the changes in the other micronutrients or other nutrients as well. So this is how we usually do. For the growers, as Karnail says, the recommendation is that if you see a major issue, like your plant doesn't grow well, or you see some deficiency symptoms, then you do the analysis. If everything is working, usually you do it between 2 to 3 years. You can do a soil test and then check things to make sure everything is working well and your soil health is in a good shape. We also, in the experiment, we did the soil microbiome, and we're still working the data, just analyzed. We're still working on the data. So there is a lot of other measurements as well as nematode measurements that we did, and the results is now preparing, and we're gonna present those results later this year.
Awesome. Well, I just want to thank Karnail and Mehdi, both of you, for joining us for this event. I think I can speak for everyone when I say that we're leaving much more knowledgeable. Your breadth and depth of knowledge is incredible, and we're very thankful for your generosity in sharing it with us. So thank you again for joining us and answering all of these questions and for being part of that video. It was great to see. I just want to note before we wrap up that we do have upcoming virtual events, so keep an eye out for those. We have a cover cropping and vegetable production event on February 22nd and a rotational grazing and cover crop integration event on March 6th. So I'll be following up on this with an email, and that'll include those upcoming events and then some resources and information that you can go to. And then we'll also include a survey that'll have that'll just ask for feedback on this event and how we can improve it for the future. So thank you to everyone who joined us and for being part of this and asking questions. It's really helpful to gather everyone together and talk about these things. And it's inspiring to have so many folks here and interested in these conversations. So thank you again. And before we end, is there anything else you wanted to add, Mehdi or Karnail, before we close the call?
Thank you. Thank you guys, and thanks everybody to join. And that's all I want to say.
Thank you so much, Finley, and everyone else, the organizers, as well as people who participated. And thanks for the great questions. I always enjoy these interactions. You have a wonderful evening.